Hi, I'm John,
And I'm Meredith.
and this is No Talking in the Library. Today, do we have a theme for today, or did we just decide to pick
This was a request from a coworker. He wanted us to talk about the 1991 film Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken. And so, in addition to that, I think we may touch upon other live action Disney movies of the 90s. So, that's our
right,
very specific topic of the day.
right. It seemed like, so I'd never seen this movie before. I'd heard the name. It seemed like once I started kind of looking into it, that Disney in the 90s started making a lot more sort of what you might call serious live action movies than they had before. I mean, I remember as a little kid seeing like Hot Lead and Cold Feet or The Apple Dumpling Gang, which were very unserious movies. But this was a movie that was I discovered sort of only after I watched it, based on someone's actual life.
Yes, it was the life of Sonora Webster Carver, and this movie was based on her memoir, A Girl and Five Brave Horses. And for those of you who have no idea what this is the story of the diving horse show that was extremely popular during the Depression era,
Yeah,
which is not
right.
something I knew about before having watched this movie.
Right. I thought actually that was a joke. I mean, if you'd asked me several days ago what I thought about diving horses, I thought it was just not something that really happened. But of course, everything happened during the Depression. I mean, people were really looking for new forms of entertainment and willing to watch just about anything that might involve death or catastrophic injury.
You had to
Like,
pass the time somehow back then.
right, exactly. You couldn't just spin up YouTube videos ad nauseum. So this is a movie about a girl who has a sort of typical wicked stepmother. In this case, I think wicked aunt experience where she.
She looks like a woman pulled from who took those Depression photo era photos?
Oh, yeah, the Dust Bowl ones.
Yeah, I can't, the name has just completely slipped out of my mind, but she looks just like that.
Dorothea Lange.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of. She looks
Um,
just like the sad Dust Bowl like mom.
right. This is the star of this movie is Gabrielle Anwar, who people in this day and age will remember as Fiona from the long-running show Burn Notice. She has a much more convincing accent in Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken than she does in Burn Notice, where she starts out with the accent that she's supposed to have and then kind of gives up on it and goes back to her normal British accent, which is fine. She has a sort of a misbehaving moment. She lets some cows loose, and her aunt punishes her by selling off her horse. And she runs away and essentially joins the circus and sees an exhibition of this horse diving stuff and becomes really entranced by it and wants to be a part of it. And it's basically the story of her. It's a kind of coming of age story of her, learning to find her way in the Depression, find her way as a sort of person on her own, and find her way in this completely bizarre way of earning your money. Yeah, I mean, the idea of like diving horse, I don't know, it's still a little hard to grok that people actually did that.
And that would be a wonderful story in and of itself, but in fact, there is one more wrinkle that happens towards the end of the movie, and that is during a dive. Now, from what I've read, and I think is mentioned in the movie, horses were never really injured during this. I don't know if that's true, but
Right.
it's what they say. Only riders were hurt, and Sonora was doing a dive and hit the water in an awkward way, kind of like face first, eyes open, and it caused an injury that detached her retinas and caused her to go blind. And sort of the end of the movie is her trying to relearn how to do the diving horse's act, as it involves mounting the horse while the horse is in a gallop up this ramp. And she does and goes on to dive horses like 11 years like after that point, like
Right.
doing it
There's a
all
sort of
blind.
coda at the end of the movie where she says, I went on and did this for 11 years after this, which is really, I mean, okay, number one, there just is not a chance that I would ever I mean, I don't like diving off a high board, just like excluding the whole horse aspect of the whole thing. So that really takes a lot of, I mean, you got to have a lot of faith in what you're doing. If you, like you and like several 100 pounds of horse are going to be heading for the water at the same time together. It's a really moving movie. I mean, I think it's a kind of a YA type movie. Like it's really was in its original release meant for teens, but it's a really great movie about overcoming adversity and trying to sort of confront your fear of doing new things. And yeah, it was really, I thought it was really moving. I think the performances are really good. Gabrielle Anwar, we mentioned before, Michael Shuffling as Al, Cliff Robertson, long-term character actor, is really fabulous in it. Kathleen York, who was in about every series that was on TV in the 90s for at least one episode, plays Marie. A really enjoyable and really heartwarming movie in a way that sort of Disney was. This movie came out in 1991. I think it was part of this idea of kind of writing these movies. They have a sort of lesson and a message, but it's not kind of like in your face. It's more just about, this is a person's story. It has the virtue of actually being a true story as well.
Yeah, this movie was really like the epoch of films for horse girls and tomboys of the 90s. I loved this movie. And when I was growing up, I don't remember it being in theaters. I'm assuming it was. I don't know that for a fact. Maybe it was just a Wonderful World of Disney movie. But I do remember it in syndication. Flipping through channels and seeing an ad being like, Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken, playing 10 a.m. on Sunday on UPN or whatever,
Right.
channel aired it. This movie came out in mid-90s. I'd probably be 8 or 9 and be like, oh, gotta make sure I wake up on Sunday and camp out in front of the TV in the kitchen before anyone else to watch this movie. Like I can't remember another movie that if I saw that it was going to be playing on TV that I would have to tune in and watch this movie because, it had everything for me. It had, young women doing interesting, exciting things. It had a historical aspect. Doc Carver invented the diving horse show, and he was a trick shooter, a man who sort of came up in the tradition of Buffalo Bill Cody and Annie Oakley, and so I was always interested in anything historical of that time. And then it had the whole fact that she became blind and still did the act. So this was a movie that I very much loved as a kid.
Right. It's kind of interesting that it sort of stops at the blindness part, or that's kind of the last bit, because in a way that's sort of, it's all about her kind of climbing these steps of trying to sort of find her way, and blindness obviously becomes the biggest hurdle of all. And it's funny too, because it's a very 90s film. Like the sort of character of the kind of tomboy girl kind of changed in its application over the years. So it's very different than, say, True Grit, which is, the modern version of True Grit, the more sort of potty-mouthed one, where it's a little more sort of uses kind of more techniques of literary naturalism. This has kind of like softer edges, and there's some intense stuff in it for sure. But it's definitely kind of, I showed it to I sat around watching with my kid who's 5, and he really enjoyed it. Mostly because he could not believe that somebody was gonna like jump a horse off a diving board. Like he definitely thought that was like the craziest thing he'd ever seen, and I kind of agreed. This is part of, I think, kind of, if you look at Disney, I think a lot of people think of them for their animated stuff, but this is really a thing that Disney got to do pretty well in a way, don't you think?
Yeah, there's another movie that came out a few years later called A Far Off Place, which starred a very, very young Reese Witherspoon.
Right. Yeah.
Wikipedia says that this is her first starring role in a feature film, but she was in The Man in the Moon in 1991, and I don't exactly know where Wikipedia was getting that fact, but she was still very young. And it was another film sort of in this genre of sort of that's not based on fact necessarily. They were based on books though. They were books written by Lawrence Vanderpost, who was like a South African naturalist. And so I'm sure he was writing from his own experience, but it's a story of these two young people who, one who was visiting with his family, the other family who lived and worked in Africa trying to prevent poachers from killing elephants, and poachers attacked the reservation that they're living on, and the children, they're not children, they're teens, along with a bushman named Zabo, have to cross the Kalahari Desert in order to like escape from these poachers. So it's got the same sort of feel of Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken, these movies that were about youths trying to overcome some sort of massive, in the case of walking across the Kalahari Desert, it's sort of a massive undertaking. But again, a movie that I saw when I was younger, and I really was just transfixed by the story. So I can't think of anything else. I mean, Disney sort of has gotten away from that, I think, in the last decade or two. But
yeah, the thing I really remember about that movie is that it was really beautifully shot. I don't remember much. I went back and watched some of it before we were going to do this, and definitely I don't remember Reese Witherspoon looking like. I think the first thing I ever saw Reese Witherspoon in was Election, which she did in 1999, maybe, with Matthew Broderick, okay, which is a movie with a much different flavor and a much different kind of direction. But it's sort of interesting to see now too, like, you could look at some of these movies, and in a way they're sort of like the Hallmark movies of today. Like, Hallmark movies are, and I say this for those of you who don't know, like, Meredith is a serious devotee of Hallmark movies as a genre. But what is it that you notice about Hallmark movies? They're sort of like Hallmark movie pros, right? And then there are Hallmark movie people who've sort of done other things and then become kind of Hallmark movie, like go into Hallmark movies as a kind of holding pattern or whatever, although it's...
Yeah, you see the people either coming up in their career or coming down from a career, or they're just the ones that are just, all they do is Hallmark movies.
Right. But I mean, the comparison here, I think, is these movies have a kind of similarity to Hallmark movies in the sense that, there's some sort of action and interesting stuff in them, but they're not going to there's nothing in there that's going to be like really horrifying or really devastating. You kind of know going into Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken, or you kind of get the feeling that things are probably going to be okay in the end. It's not one of these movies where like you're wondering, wow, is everybody going to she and the horse hit the edge of the pool and that's the end of that's the end of the show or whatever. But it took me a while to sort of understand why people like Hallmark movies. But I think people like them for the same reason that I like movies like Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken, in the sense that it's good entertainment without, where you don't have to worry about stuff. I mean, it's like, remember when we were talking about That Thing You Do? Like, the first time you watch That Thing You Do, you're kind of waiting like, oh, like what's going to happen? That's the total catastrophe. Is it going to turn out that Tom Hanks is a total scumbag who's going to rip them off? And in the end, there's a sort of, they have some problems, but they overcome it and it's fine. And that's what movies like this are all about. It's about people overcoming hardships and the sort of process of that and kind of reaffirmation of people's humanity, which is, I think, certainly a reasonable thing to want to watch.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of live action movies that I've seen recently from Disney, and the ones that stick out are they did a bunch of sports ones. I remember The $1 Million Arm and McFarlane USA, and those movies though really weren't about like young adults and teens. They were like, John Hamm is in this Disney movie, or not Russell Crowe, Waterworld, Kevin Costner,
yes.
Kevin Costner is in this movie about runners. And it's not necessarily meant to appeal to or capture sort of the imagination of children. It's for their parents to drag them to.
Right. Right. I mean, that's the sort of, I was thinking about movies that I got taken to when I was a child, and we didn't go to the movies very often. And I think part of the reason was I can count the number of times I sat in a theater watching a movie that my mom didn't necessarily want to see on one hand. Really, the only time we went to the movies was if it was something one or more of my parents wanted to see. So I got taken as a child to Young Frankenstein in the theater. I mean, that's still date me a little bit, but I mean, think about like I couldn't have been more than about 10 when I saw it, and think about taking your 10-year-old to that movie, or like we went to a drive-in one time to see The Bad News Bears, which is probably not a movie you want to, like the original Walter Matthau.
That's like this is a 70s movie for kids. Like that's what they were like back then.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like the end of The Bad News Bears, where the kids were all drinking beer and then throwing the empty beer cans at the team that beat them.
Yeah. This is what kids like, right?
Right. Well, this, just as an aside, and just because this always strikes me as weird, like, so when The Bad News Bears came out, like after it was a very popular movie, and I think it was after the Breaking Training and the Bad News Bears Go to Japan came out, they made a series, I think it was very short-lived, for television, which was a little sort of younger theme than the actual Bad News Bears, obviously because it had to be on TV and you couldn't have people swearing. But there was an episode in which, like, the sort of underlying premise is that like all the kids wanted to go to this roller derby match, and I'm like, this is the kind of thing that's thought up by a bunch of like comedy writers sitting around drinking bourbon late at night, because no high school kid wants to go see the roller derby. Like no high school kid, knows who Big Mama Minucci is or cares. Like, what was the deal with that? But that just sort of illustrates how different the 70s were than now. Like now, I think people making this kind of content, by and large, are like much more alive to what the lives of young adults, what the lives of teens are actually like. I mean, sometimes they want to be, they're sort of too heavy on the let's make a point thing, but it's much less that, I watch a lot of this TV because I'm a librarian and I want to know what people are interested in, and I have a little kid too, but it's much less often the case that I watch something and be like, that was something an adult came up with who'd never hung around very many children or didn't really know what was up with them. But that's, the Disney movies that are coming out now, I think you're really right, are meant to be sort of movies that help the parents kind of look back to a time when they watched Disney live action movies and enjoyed them.
Yeah, I'm sure there are like, I think kids, what do they watch? YouTube now? That's all the kids care about.
Right, yeah, or TikToks.
Yeah, whatever.
They watch the TikToks.
But in my day, we like to watch, live action movies about historical figures.
Yeah, definitely. In between, like walking 10 miles to school uphill in each direction.
But overall, these are my feelings towards these movies are still, net positive. These are still, I think, great movies. Another one that I watched recently, the Homeward Bound, which apparently is a remake. The one from the 90s is not the original.
No, yeah, you're right.
Homeward Bound.
Right. When you first said that, I was thinking of the other one, which, I've
not seen the original. The one from the 90s has Sally Field as the cat, and Michael J. Fox is not the old timer dog. But there's another movie that I rewatched recently, and I still just like, I'm sure it was a combination of nostalgia and just enjoyment, but I cried through the whole thing, and it was wonderful.
Right. The original one came out in 1980, and Lucy Dreyer, who was the young person in it, I don't have very good memories of it, but if I'm not wrong, David Soul, who played the adult, was one of the guys in Starsky and Hutch, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just gonna look because he was Hutch. There you go. But yeah, Homeward Bound, the more modern. I saw the other one a long time ago, but I saw the more recent one too, and I really I like that movie a lot. Once again for the same reasons we've been talking about here
So I don't know if all of these are on Disney Plus. I think some of them are.
Yeah.
So feel free to fire up a film and have the whole family enjoy
Yeah, absolutely.
classic 90s live action Disney film.
Yeah, I
They're
mean,
not
Disney
quite
Plus.
as ubiquitous, I think, as like the 90s, the Disney Renaissance of, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, but I think there's still a lot of good stuff that I don't think is quite as well known, and you may discover a film you quite enjoy.
Yeah, I really, as a person who like needing to find entertainment for a 5-year-old on family fun nights, Disney Plus is a great service. It's pretty cheap. I think it's like $12 a month or something like that, and they have like a flat ton of content on it. I mean, it's really, it's one of the sort of unfortunate things of the world right now is that everybody's like, we're going to offer our own streaming service. So whereas you used to be able to find, a large proportion of whatever on Netflix now, we have subscriptions to, I think, like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, and Disney Plus. But Disney Plus is, I think a really worthwhile service. One reason being that you can find these movies from the 90s that I think are really gems awaiting rediscovery. All right. Well, I think that's enough from us for the time being.
Yep.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
Till next time.